Welcome to the Private School Leader Podcast, where private school leaders learn how to thrive and not just survive as they serve and lead their schools. I strongly believe that it is possible to have a long and happy and fulfilling career as a private school leader. And my passion is to help you figure out exactly how to do just that, right here on the Private School Leader Podcast. And I'm your host, Mark Minkus. So back in October of 2023, I recorded episode 53 of the podcast, and the title of episode 53 was 5 Powerful Leadership Lessons from Atomic Habits. And that episode is one of the most downloaded episodes in the history of this podcast. And, you know, the popularity of that episode has nothing to do with me and has everything to do with James Clear's amazing book, Atomic Habits. It is the #1 best-selling nonfiction book of all time, sold over 20 million copies and translated into 60 languages. And so this book has had worldwide impact. And so I know not everyone listening to this has read Atomic Habits, and so I decided, let's see what ChatGPT can say in 50 words or less about this book. So here we go. Atomic Habits by James Clear is a guide to building better habits through small, consistent changes. It emphasizes that lasting change comes from focusing on identity, not just outcomes. By shaping your environment, tracking progress, and refining systems, you can make good habits easy and bad habits difficult. And I got to admit, that's a pretty good synopsis of Atomic Habits. And the idea behind the title is the atom is the smallest thing that we can measure. And so he talks about how tiny habits can have remarkable results when multiplied by time. And so, again, back in October of 2023, I decided to pull out 5 quotes from the book, 5 leadership lessons, and obviously that really resonated with this audience. And so I decided to go back to Atomic Habits again, and there are more important lessons in that book for private school leaders. So on today's episode of the Private School Leader Podcast, we are going to discuss 4 more powerful leadership lessons from Atomic Habits. So before we do that, I have a question for you. Do you ever have teacher drama at your school? Well, if you're listening to this in real time, your school year is wrapping up, and it's around the time of maybe the last teacher work days. And if you're anything like me, you know, sometimes in the past there was a sense of relief because the teachers, the kids, the parents, they're going to hopefully give you a break during the summer and you can get some other things done. But during the school year, when teachers get emotional, when teachers get petty, when teachers get offended by other teachers' behavior and just all of the things that kind of impact teacher morale, you know, I decided I wanted to make a resource to help you. And so I have a new resource called 5 Strategies to Reduce Teacher Drama at Your School. And this is a 9-page PDF that will get to the heart of the matter of giving you strategies that can actually help reduce the teacher drama at your school. And this is at theprivateschoolleader.com/drama. And that's the 5 strategies to reduce teacher drama at your school. We're coming up on summer. You might have a few extra minutes to read this and then try to apply it in the fall. But again, you can grab your free guide, 5 strategies to reduce teacher drama at your school, at theprivateschoolleader.com/drama. And I also wanted to let you know that over the past few weeks, again, we're in late May in real time, that I've had a bunch of school leaders purchasing Parent Academy, and their plan is to use one or both of the plug-and-play teacher PDs in the teacher in-service at the end of summer. And Parent Academy, as you probably know, contains 2 45-minute webinars that are plug-and-play teacher PDs. There's a 27-page printable notebook. There's guided notes, discussion questions. You can check out more about that at theprivateschoolleader.com/Parent Academy. And, again, just a reminder that this is your step-by-step framework that will help you and your teachers go from feeling stressed and anxious to feeling confident and calm. And I've just taken everything that I've learned over the past 33 years about working with parents, put it into an online course. I'll teach you everything that I know in the first 4 modules, you as the leader, and then your teachers have these 2 plug-and-play PDs. So check that out, theprivateschoolleader.com/Parent Academy. And I want to give you one more free gift as just a way to say thank you for listening to the podcast. And this one, speaking of parents, is a brand new resource that I created 2 weeks ago, and it's called The 4 Worst Things Parents Believe About Your School and How to Change Their Minds. And, I get really frustrated and discouraged when parents believe things about our school that aren't true. And we work really, really hard, and the problem is that parent perception is reality. Well, I've created a PDF guide for you that will talk about 4 big, super problematic things that the parents probably believe about your school, but most importantly, I'm going to teach you how to change their minds. So you can grab this at theprivateschoolleader.com/believe. This is a free gift. It's a PDF, and it's called The 4 Worst Things Parents Believe About Your School and How to Change Their Minds. And that's at theprivateschoolleader.com/believe. Hope that helps. Okay, so in today's episode, we are talking about 4 more powerful leadership lessons from Atomic Habits. And so what I'm going to do is read a quote. That'll be the leadership lesson, is the quote, and then just discuss it briefly and then apply it to you and your life as a private school leader. We try to make things tactical and practical here on the podcast. So leadership lesson number 1, quote, "Good habits make time your ally. Bad habits make time your enemy." And I'll read that one more time. Leadership lesson number 1, good habits make time your ally. Bad habits make time your enemy. So what James Clear is talking about here is obviously he's speaking to the compounding nature of habits over time. And obviously when we think of compound, we think of compound interest and how saving money when we're younger, we all wish we had started earlier, but then the interest that money earns, then that amount of money grows, and then interest is earned on that larger amount of money, and it compounds over time. And the longer the time that it has to compound, not a whole lot of money can turn into a lot of money. And so the same is true with our habits. And so what does it mean, and what leadership lesson can we take from good habits make time your ally, bad habits make time your enemy? Okay, well, first of all, I want you to think about the fact that habits are not static behaviors. And what I mean by that is that they don't exist in a vacuum. They don't exist in a moment in time. Like there's this timeline and there's just this dot on a timeline, and that's the habit, because that's not true. Habits are things that happen over time, and it's something that also gains momentum. And so things can gain momentum and can be a really good thing. Like if your favorite sports team is staging a big comeback and the crowd is into it and they have all the momentum and then they win the game. But it also can be a bad thing if there's a car that's sitting on a hill and the brakes go out, but the car is rolling and rolling and rolling and gaining more momentum, then there's going to be a crash. And so habits, first of all, they're not static behaviors. They're not a point in time on a timeline. All right. So if we have good habits, then time is going to work in our favor. So that makes sense. So every day that I stick with a good habit, then I'm going to get some small gains, and then they're going to eventually result in a large and much more meaningful change in my life. And so the first thing that I think of, and probably you think of too, is the way that I eat, my habits about what food I put into my body. If I eat in a healthy way, multiplied by time, then chances are I'm going to be a healthier person. But the flip side of that, of course, is that bad habits also compound, but they compound in the opposite direction. And so if I'm going to eat fast food 2 meals a day and have brownies for breakfast every day, then I'm going to, over time, gain weight, feel lethargic, have other things that go along with that. So this is not rocket science. We get the idea that good habits, time is our ally, bad habits, time is the enemy. But here's the other thing that's tricky about habits. In the moment, they don't feel like a big deal. Like, what's the big deal with just having that Big Mac? And quite honestly, it's not that big of a deal to have that Big Mac once or maybe even once a week. And so the point is that in the short term, when we make a poor choice, in the moment, it doesn't seem like a big deal because it's not a big deal. What it is it's the cumulative debt. Let's use the word debt. It's the cumulative debt that accrues, that accumulates, and debts usually come with interest, almost always come with interest, and then they get to the point where they're overwhelming. And so the other thought from this quote, as I was looking into it and trying to see how James Clear elaborated it for his readers, is he has another phrase here that I really liked, and it says, time amplifies whatever direction you're headed in. Time amplifies whatever direction you're headed in. Okay, I'm getting to the application here in a minute, trust me. So again, on the good side, time amplifying the direction you're headed in, that's compound interest, like we talked about before. It's eating healthy, it's moving your body, and then you're a more healthy person, so on and so forth. Okay. But also time can amplify whatever direction you're headed in a bad way. And so I've used this example before, but I decided to actually get specific about it. So if a plane takes off from New York City and it's flying to LAX, which is 2,475 miles, if the heading from New York City to LAX is supposed to be one thing, but if the pilot is off by 5 degrees, 5 degrees out of 360 degrees is very, very small, hardly noticeable. But if he's off by 5 degrees, he's going to land in Tijuana, Mexico. And so my point is that across the United States, as that plane flies, that little tiny degree that it's off course, it probably wouldn't be noticeable if it was flying from, New York City to whatever the next closest big city with an airport is. But it's going all the way across the country. And so time amplifies whatever direction you're headed in. So then what's the application for us as private school leaders? Okay. The first thing is that I want you to think about how our school leadership is not about the quick fix. Okay? And a lot of times it feels like our leadership is about the quick fix because we are dealing with urgent issues, that whole urgency and importance and what other people think is urgent and want us to adopt their definition of urgency. But we go around putting out a lot of fires. It's almost like we have this little fire extinguisher that's like the size of a squirt spray bottle that's attached to our waist, and we go around with that little fire extinguisher putting out fires all day. That kind of feels like what our job is. But even if it feels that way, that's not what real school leadership is about. What real school leadership is about the foundation. It's about culture. It's about systems. It's about strategic thinking. It's about improving teacher morale. It's about improving teacher performance. It's about student performance, student outcomes. Those are the big things that we wish that we had time to work on, but because of the tyranny of the urgent, many times we don't get the time or take the time or have the time to work on these things. And so we're not just going to throw our hands up in the air and say, oh man, this whole idea of bad habits is, that time is my enemy and that time amplifies whatever direction you're headed in. Yeah, that's not great if what we're doing is all the time putting out fires, solving other people's problems that many of them could probably solve themselves, running ourselves into the ground, getting exhausted, getting burnt out, not having anything left for our families. That has a cumulative effect that is not good. And we talk about that a lot on this show. So that is illuminating the reality of this leadership lesson. But I want to also then make it tactical as far as, okay, well, what are we going to do about that? So let's get into lesson number 2. And so leadership lesson number 2 from Atomic Habits is, quote, make the cues of your good habits obvious and the cues of your bad habits invisible. So let me hit you with that again. Quote, make the cues of your good habits obvious and the cues of your bad habits invisible. So here's the idea. If a cue is obvious, then the habit is more likely to occur. And if the cue is hidden, then that habit tends to weaken and fade over time until it eventually fades out. And so we want to form a good habit, and I'll get to the application in a minute. I know I'm talking about the book and it's general right now, but I want to get to specifically what does this have to do with you as a private school leader. I'll get there in a second. So if we want to form a good habit, we want to make the cue to do the thing highly visible. So for example, if you want to go for a walk every day when you get home from work, if you have your shorts and your sweatshirt and your sneakers are visible and they're right there when you come in the back door, then that's much more likely to happen. But if they're in a drawer and the shoes are up on a shelf or, whatever friction exists between you and that walk, then it's much less likely to happen. And then the converse is true. If we want to break a bad habit, we've got to make the cue more hidden, more obscure, harder to access, less noticeable, all of these things. Okay. But here's what I want you to know. I think that sometimes we're incorrectly thinking that our habits are about 100% willpower, and that's not really true, because our habits can be really much, much more about designing the environment intentionally to promote better behavior. And I'm going to give you an example from my life, and then we're going to apply this to your email inbox. Because let's face it, the email inbox is kind of the bane of our existence as private school leaders. So let me give you an example from my life about designing your environment to form a habit. So way back in episode 1, I told you about how I lost 60 pounds in about 9 months in 2011. And I tell my story in episode 1 about what finally got me to lose that weight. Okay. Now, in 2012, June 2012, I started working as head of middle school, new job, new school at the Jewish day school. And so I had just lost 60 pounds. I knew this was going to be stressful just because there were some things that needed to be fixed. I knew it was going to be stressful because it was a new job, a new culture, a new everything, quite frankly. And I was really not wanting to do what I always do when I get stressed, which is stress eating. And so I decided that in my office at school that I was going to intentionally design my environment so that I only had access to a few certain things. So for 12 years that I was at the school, in my office, the only things that were ever in my office were bottles of water, some cans of Coke Zero, my lunch, which was always either a Weight Watchers or Lean Cuisine microwave lunch, and then protein bars, low-fat, high-protein bar that I would eat halfway through the morning and eat one halfway through the afternoon. Now, that was the only thing that was in my office for 12 years. And so I kept the weight off, not because I wasn't stressed, not because I didn't want to stress eat, and I did my share of stress eating outside of school hours, but you know how much time you spend at school. I spent a lot of time at school over those 12 years, and I was probably more stressed out in the moment at school than when I was at home. And if I had had sweets, candy, chips, you name it, accessible in my office, and I had space, I had a cabinet, I had a fridge, this and that, a little mini fridge, I know that I would have put that weight back on. And so my point is that I intentionally designed the environment because I wasn't confident that I had the willpower. So willpower multiplied or added to the environment can actually change the habit. And so let's lean into your email inbox for a moment. So I'm going to link it in the show notes at theprivateschoolleader.com/episode 136. But way back in episode 7, the title of that was the top 4 productivity hacks for busy private school leaders. And I'm going to link that in the show notes because it's going to talk about the power of an index card, and it's going to talk about your email inbox and what kind of relationship you have with it. And most of us, what we do is we dip in and out of it all day long, and that's about the worst practice that we can engage in with regards to productivity and time management. And you've heard me say it before on the podcast that your email inbox is where productivity goes to die. And I've also said that your email inbox is a chronological list of everyone else's priorities. So if you're listening to this in late May, early June, and you want to kind of dabble with these strategies that I'm about to talk about, that over the summer, then maybe those would stick around during the school year when things start to get crazier again. So the theme of this leadership lesson number 2 is, how are we going to make something that we want to do more obvious and something that we don't want to do more hidden? So the obvious thing is the index card. And for probably the last 3 years, maybe 4 years, to the right side of my desk, I've had an index card with my 3 or 4 must-do items for the day sitting in exactly the same spot. And it's gotten to the point now that when I would be at school and I would come back from someplace and I would sit down, instead of opening up my email, which is what most of us do, I would reach for the index card. We want to feel productive. Our brain is screaming for a dopamine hit because we've been out in the school and we've spent energy, emotional energy. We have decision fatigue. We're a little bit physically fatigued, and we need a dopamine hit, and we want to feel productive. And the brain will give you a dopamine hit if you open up your email inbox and start going through it. But the brain doesn't know the difference between a high-value task and a low-value task, which is why I make the index card obvious and I make the email inbox more hidden. Well, how do we make it more hidden? Okay, well, we're going to create some friction between you and your email inbox. So the first thing is, and you've heard me say this 100 times, I'm going to say it again, is to turn off your school email notifications on your smartphone. That's a must. And then also, while we're talking about your smartphone, is to press the button, it lights up. How many swipes does it take to get to your icon for your email for school? For most people, it's 0 or 1. And I just mentioned this on a recent episode, that coaching clients who move their school email icon 2 swipes, that it drops about 80% as far as how often they're checking email outside of school. You're creating friction. You're making it literally hidden. It's not right there on your home screen with that tiny little number down in the corner, and you subconsciously know what the number was the last time that you noticed that icon, and you know that there's more. And so we can't help ourselves. We don't have enough willpower to not check email. We need a little friction between us and the email inbox. And then the last thing of a way to make it hidden is to open a window. So let's say that you have Google Chrome, or if you have Safari, it works the same. The logo is down at the bottom of your screen. And the next time that you have the opportunity, I really would encourage you to try this. If you hover over that logo and you right-click, it will give you an option to create a new window or open a new window. You open a new window, and then you open your Gmail or your email in that window. And then you hover back over the logo at the bottom, and there will be two little squares there. One will be the square with all your tabs open, and one will be just your email. And you then go back to the one with all your tabs open, and you close the email tab. And now what you've done is, when you come back from somewhere, and your computer is open, and those tabs are open, most of us, we can see the little parentheses that shows how many unread emails we have. And I have a coaching client near Washington, D.C., and she would have a specific number. I think it was 12, that if it dropped below that number, she had to stop what she was doing and check her email inbox. How about we decide when we're going to check email, and we schedule a time in the morning and a time in the afternoon. You'll hear more about this in episode 7 if you go and listen to that. How about we aren't in and out of our email inbox all day long, and we decide when we're going to hover over that logo at the bottom, click on that window, and work on our email. And then we're going to go back to the other window with all the tabs that are open. So if leadership lesson number 2 is to make the cues of your good habits obvious and the cues of your bad habits invisible, we're talking about applying those to your email inbox. Okay, that brings us to leadership lesson number 3 from Atomic Habits. And this is, quote, "The most effective form of motivation is progress." Number 3 is, quote, "The most effective form of motivation is progress." So, seeing progress, no matter how small that progress is, can be a super powerful motivator. And, I just think that if we track our progress on certain things and then celebrate the small wins, that it gives us that momentum that we're looking for. And I'm thinking, I always have a Google Doc with titles for future episodes, and one of them is Fall in Love with Progress, Not Goals. And let's stop for a minute and think about this. So this is episode 136 of this podcast. How did I do that? Well, I did it by making a little bit of progress every week. And I want to talk about that more in just a moment, because I then want to apply it to you and some of the things that you want to be more intentional about spending time on, especially those big, important things that we don't often get to spend time on because we're dealing with the tyranny of the urgent. But we'll just put a pin in that for a moment. But 136 weeks in a row of a podcast episode with, most of those episodes while I was still working full-time as a head of intermediate and middle school at a Jewish day school. How did I pull that off? Making a little bit of progress every week. And so, again, we want to fall in love with progress. And I'm not saying we fall out of love with goals, but here's the tricky part with goals. They're important, but in my experience, I will accomplish a big goal and then I don't feel as good as I thought I was going to feel. And once I accomplish that big goal, then I kind of feel a little aimless and a little directionless. And I remember back between the fall of 1999 and the fall of 2001, I was getting my master's degree Tuesday nights from 6 to 10 p.m. every Tuesday for 2 years. I was leading the school of, in that era, anywhere from 400 to 500 students, pre-K through 12, head of school. I was leading a capital campaign for $1 million. I was helping to supervise a building construction project of building a gymnasium with 4 classrooms, locker rooms, a kitchen, bleachers, and a stage that was around $1 million. And I was leading the school through initial accreditation. And around that time, our daughters were like 2, 4, and 6 years old. And so all of those simultaneous goals and just getting them all done. And it was September of 2001 that checked all the boxes, finished all the things, got the plaque, cut the ribbon, met the goal on the thermometer, all those things. And it was one of the low points of my career because, I don't know, I just thought I was going to feel so much better, and I just didn't. And that's just me. Maybe you feel much more amazing when you accomplish a big goal, but I want you to like goals but love progress, okay? I want you to like goals but love progress. Like I said, probably will be a future episode on that. But here's the application to you as a private school leader. I really, really encourage you to track your progress. And I actually encourage you to do it on something. Maybe you are going to do it digitally, and that's fine. But I just find that the tactile aspect of me actually writing a number this many hours, or 0.5 if I spent 30 minutes on something on that particular day, I find that the actually writing it down has made a big difference. So I want to go back to, I want to really emphasize this point, that when it comes to you and you've got big things like accreditation or the strategic plan or revamping teacher observations or some big thing in your school or multiple big things, how in the heck are you going to make progress on that when everything is on fire around you? And I'm telling you from experience that the way that you can make your way through that tyranny of the urgent and all those fires is by tracking your progress. Because this is what happened with me, okay? So in November of 2020, I started tracking, and I decided that I was going to start a podcast. So in November of 2020, I decided I was going to start a podcast. The first episode of the podcast didn't come out until October of 2022 because there was a lot to learn and there was a lot to do. And with the website and with the platform hosting and just all this different stuff, okay? But I decided in November of 2020 that I was going to average 10 hours a week on this effort while I was working full-time. And as you know, that 2020-2021 school year was one that we don't really want to remember, okay? So I'm not saying that I worked 10 hours every week, but I did average 10 hours a week because I would make up for it during some breaks or the summer or what have you. But for 4 years, I averaged the equivalent, or I averaged 10 hours a week, which is 2,000 hours, to get to the point where I was in November of 2024 when I retired. And in those 4 years, those 2,000 hours, that's the equivalent of a 40-hour work week with 52 weeks, but 2 weeks vacation. So if you take a 40-hour work week, 50 weeks of working that in 4 years while still working full-time as a private school leader, I was able to carve out the equivalent of a year's work. Well, how did I do that? I'm telling you, I'm not a heroic self-discipline person. I'm really not. The only thing that got me there was writing it down. And I can't emphasize that enough, that just, it was a big goal, and just wrote down 30 minutes here, 60 minutes there, 2 hours on a Saturday morning before everyone woke up at my house. Just a little bit here and there. And I know that you're thinking, okay, so if he's saying that I'm going to be able to write stuff down and have a calendar and track my progress, that I did a little bit here and a little bit there towards these big goals of accreditation or strategic plan or a big capital campaign or all of the above, I'm not so sure that he's ever been to my school, because I don't have any time to do any of these things. And so this is where episode 7 that I've talked about twice now comes in, because if you can implement those top 4 productivity hacks that are in episode 7, I'm telling you that it will make a difference. And then the thing that will push these big projects over the line and help you look back and see your progress and encourage you and help you build some momentum and help you celebrate some small wins along the way instead of just the big win when you check the box for the goal and move on to the next thing, is writing it down and falling in love with progress. All right, I'll get off my soapbox. You can tell I was on my soapbox about that. Okay, and that brings us to leadership lesson number 4 from Atomic Habits. Quote, the most effective way to change your habits is to focus not on what you want to achieve, but on who you wish to become. So one more time, the most effective way to change your habits is to focus not on what you want to achieve, but on who you wish to become. And this one's a little similar to a quote that was in that first episode where James Clear says that every action you take is a vote towards the person you wish to become. And so in his book, Atomic Habits, he argues and teaches that most people start habit formation backwards. That's a quote from the book. In other words, they begin with the goal, which is the outcome that they're looking for, instead of starting with their identity. And so you've heard me talk about a compelling why. And again, that's back in episode 1 of my compelling why of throwing starfish. And I tell the story of how I chose that if you want to go back and listen to episode 1. But real change that sticks around is when it flows from your identity. And this quote that I read, it's really trying to just capture the idea of what an identity-based habit is. Because identity-based habits stick around, but habits that we do because we think we should, or someone's nagging us to do it, or, we saw something on Instagram, or we saw somebody who was in shape and that made us feel bad, and so we're going to get in shape. Those kind of habits almost never stick around. But the ones that are deep, the ones that last, the ones that are a transformation are usually when it starts with your identity and then that flows to the behavior. And so let me give you several examples. So instead of saying, I want to lose 20 pounds, you're thinking, I want to be a healthy person. That's your identity. Instead of saying, my goal is to read a book, you're saying, I'm a reader. That's your identity. Instead of saying, my goal is to finish a 5K, you're saying, I'm a runner, because that's who you are. Instead of saying, my goal is to save $500, your identity is, I am a financially responsible person. As a school leader, instead of saying, my goal is to have inbox 0 every day, you want to say and believe and be able to say, I am a productive person. And one more, instead of saying my goal is to be a really good head of school, I would love it if you said and believed and felt and said, I am a servant leader. So instead of saying my goal is to be a really good head of school, and you start thinking about the tactics and the behaviors and what you do, let's get away from what you do and start seeing it through the lens of who you are. Because if who you are is clear, then the behavior will flow from that. A lot of us get our goals and form our habits backwards. We start with the goal and the outcome instead of getting clear on the identity that is going to lead us to the outcome. And another quote from the book, quote, the most effective way to change your habits is to focus not on what you want to achieve, but on who you wish to become. And I said before that I just really, really believe, and if you've listened to this podcast for any length of time, you know that my preferred leadership style is servant leadership. And I will link episodes 5 and 6 because I spent 2 episodes early on talking about the characteristics of servant leaders, what servant leaders do, and just really go deep 2 episodes 5 and 6 on that. So what are the big takeaways from today's episode? We're talking about the four more powerful lessons, leadership lessons from Atomic Habits. Number 1, good habits make time your ally. Bad habits make time your enemy. Lesson number 2, make the cues of your good habits obvious and the cues of your bad habits invisible. Lesson number 3, the most effective form of motivation is progress. And lesson number 4, the most effective way to change your habits is to focus not on what you want to achieve, but on who you wish to become. And your call to action for this episode is to start tracking your progress. Pick a thing that you want to do decide how much time in a week that you want to spend working on that. I recommend a visible calendar with a pen or a pencil and start tracking your progress. That is your call to action. Try it. Okay, so to wrap this up, I just want to remind you really quickly about Parent Academy one more time, because we'll blink and we're scrambling to plan our teacher in service. privateschoolleader.com/Parent Academy. You can check it out, and these 2 plug and play PDs can change the way that your teachers interact with parents, not just this year, but for many years to come. And so if you want to see some testimonials from people, from school leaders who've used Parent Academy, teachers who have participated in the PD, just go to the privateschoolleader.com/Parent Academy. And then one more quick reminder about this free resource that I'd love to give to you. It's called The 4 Worst Things Parents Believe About Your School and How to Change Their Minds. And you can get that over at the privateschoolleader.com/believe. And I just appreciate you so much that you would take time out of your busy schedule, especially at this time of year in May, to listen to this podcast. And I just would really appreciate it if you would share the podcast with another school leader, with a rising leader at your school, so that we can continue to get this content out to the people who really need it. There's a lot of private school leaders out there that are struggling, that need encouragement, that need skills and tactics and strategies and encouragement, and I hope that they can find it here. So if you would please share that link to the episode or link to the podcast with them, I would be truly, truly grateful. And I've been your host, Mark Minkus. I just appreciate you so much and all the hard work that you're doing for those lucky kids and teachers at your school. Thank you so much for being here to listen today, and I hope that you'll join me next time right here on the Private School Leader Podcast. And until then, always remember to serve first, lead second, and make a difference.